So this is episode 7 of our Women Who Make It Happen series. Meredith, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Would you mind giving an intro, a brief about you?
Of course. So my name is Meredith Beeston and I'm a Financial Crime Compliance Director at ClearBank, which offers agency and embedded banking services to other financial institutions. I've been at ClearBank for over 2 years now, and before that I had several years in the consulting industry on anti-financial crime projects. And before that, did quite a bit of work in foreign policy, and also did my master's in war studies. So have a bit of an international relations background.
That's really interesting. And what made you make the move into ClearBank after doing consultancy for a few years?
I wanted to see what it was like on the other side of the table. Because when you're a consultant, you parachute in, and whether you're parachuting into design policies and procedures from scratch, or to remediate after a major crisis, or to complete an audit, you never really get to see the end-to-end life cycle of the great ideas and solutions that you deploy. And I really wanted to get that depth of understanding and see the follow-through of the work that I was doing. So that's why I decided to take a step out of consulting and join the industry. But I think consulting was really great for me to build my career, because it gave me such a variety of different experiences within the financial crime space, which I was able to then leverage effectively once I chose a specific organization to work for.
Yeah, and I think it is that broader background, isn't it, that will give you different channels or avenues. How did you get into financial crime then? Clearly you're the director at ClearBank now, so very good. What motivated you to get into financial crime and compliance in the first place?
So it wasn't an area I ever really thought I would end up in. And I mean that more generally about financial services. You know, if you had asked teenage me, were you ever going to work for a bank? I would have probably rolled my eyes. But for me, I think part of it is that when you're growing up, you don't really know that there is this wide world of different opportunities within financial services. You just see things like investment bankers and you assume that's all a bank is. You don't see that there are all these various teams within a bank, and especially in financial crime, which is such a passionate and dedicated area, and one that I'm really lucky to be a part of. So for me, as I mentioned, I came up through a bit more of a foreign policy, international relations background. And whilst doing my master's at King's College London in war studies, I wrote my dissertation focusing on comparing traditional remittance giving behaviors to the financing of homeland insurgencies among conflict-generated diaspora communities.
Oh, wow.
So I'm one of those very few people with a humanities degree who can point at my dissertation and say, that got me a job. Not really a common experience.
Yeah, I can't actually say I did it like that, actually. So
no, so I was really lucky and saw a posting for an analyst role at a consulting firm and thought, someone turned my dissertation into a job field. When did that happen? No one told me. So I applied and then learned about this whole wide world of financial crime. So it definitely wasn't the plan. It was being in the right place at the right time, and something, again, I stayed in because of the passion and the drive within the community to do the right thing and to make meaningful change.
Yeah. And utilizing your degree, like how much benefit did that give you going into that first job?
Massive, because the thing with a degree like that is it teaches you critical thinking. It teaches you how to write, research, read, and speak. And to be honest, those are the critical skills in any job, but especially as a consultant, because oftentimes you have to go in and start from scratch. You have a really high hill to climb on your first project and on the next project, because it might be totally different than the one that you started in.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, having that skill set built up through a background in academics and through various posts that I had, say at the British Embassy in the US or at different think tanks or charities, I had a lot of this experience of getting stuck in, learning how to research, learning how to present my findings, and that was so helpful going into consulting.
Very good. And then with your career to date, clearly you've mentioned the word passionate. So you seem very passionate about your field still, which is great to see. Financial crimes often an angle of like challenge, or you need to be the barrier between what's right and what's wrong for a business to do? How do you manage that? How do you cope?
I think it is relatively easy to cope if you're in a good organization that has built in those values and those principles from the top. And luckily that's something that ClearBank has really been a leader in, which I deeply appreciate. And it means that when you come in with knowing something's the right thing to do, and also you have the benefit of strong regulatory requirements as well to support that position, you're then able to make that case very clearly and articulately. But you also have to do it in a risk-based manner, and you have to make sure that you're still considering the customer. But that's just one of so many factors. So it's about presenting all of those factors together to fundamentally make your case. But luckily, I think we've all had those conversations where we've had to deal with profit or cost versus compliance.
Yeah.
That's always going to be a challenge. But when it comes down to it, it's about making sure you and your stakeholders are on the same page, and that you're able to still effectively focus on what are the fundamental risks in a bank. Fundamentally, it comes down to your regulatory compliance and also to doing the right thing in line with what the expectations are for you as a bank.
Yeah, okay, good. And throughout your career thus far, what have been the success factors for you, the key successes to get you to where you are today?
So I think for me, I've clearly achieved a relatively senior role quite early in my career. And the main reason that I've been able to do that is because of taking the initiative when I've been given those opportunities. So when I was a consultant, I was working for a relatively small firm.
Yeah.
And there were times where it was literally just the founders and myself on a team, which meant I had to step up and learn how to lead a project and deliver a project very quickly. And I always looked for those opportunities where I could take on more of a role in order to build up my skill set and to learn constantly as I was doing it. And it was the same thing when I went to ClearBank. So I joined ClearBank, as I mentioned, over 2 years ago and got promoted at the beginning of this year, which was great news. And part of the reason for that was because we went through a period after our MLRO departed where we were waiting for a full-time replacement to come in. And so I had to step in and cover that role quite significantly. And so taking the initiative to do that and to demonstrate that I was at that skill level was something that really helped drive my career forward and demonstrate to our exco that I was in a good position to further advance my career within the firm. So I think for me, taking initiative is definitely one of the key drivers. You won't know if you can achieve something until you try to. And if you have the right skill set to continue to learn, it doesn't matter if you're not doing it perfectly on the first try.
Yeah. I think that's a common theme as well, that until you make that step and that leap of faith, you don't know what you don't know, and you're only as good as what you put yourself out there to do. So, well, it's testament to you, Meredith. So, very good. What challenges, if any, have you encountered in your career? So, maybe from a diversity point of view. I mean, we're talking about our Women in Leadership series for a reason. But what, if any, have you come across?
Well, like you said, I am a very passionate person. And I think as a woman, it is at times very difficult, and you feel like you have to constantly check yourself to balance being passionate and also assertive and drawing the right line, which you always have to do in risk, with the need to be balanced and measured and come across polite and not be seen, particularly to potentially older male colleagues, as being abrasive or overly emotional and that sort of thing. So that's something where, especially as a woman, a young woman, getting that respect and credibility takes time and takes extra thought and attention to how you speak and how you convey your opinions on particular matters. So that's definitely been one of the key challenges, I think, for me as I've been evolving my career. And of course, for me, I'm American. I came from the US. the culture is a lot more direct there. People aren't afraid to say what they think. If they love something, if they hate something, they'll just go straight in. So for me as well, adapting to the UK culture, and both in terms of how I speak, but also how I listen and take in other people's views, has been another real challenge, but one I think I've risen to. And again, consulting was a great opportunity for that, because not only was I doing a lot of projects within the UK, but throughout Europe, APAC, and as well back in the US, which meant that I was able to get a real cross-cultural understanding, which built on the foundations that I had established already through having done foreign policy, international relations work prior to joining financial crime.
Yeah, you mentioned a really good point. It's almost being aware of the audience that you're sat in front of or who you're working with. So what have you done to gain that credibility that you talk about, and particularly coming over from the US, maybe having to adapt your style slightly? What did you do?
I think the start point for me is always listening and understanding where people are coming from. I think when it comes to my leadership style generally, I always try my best to take a very balanced, open-minded, collaborative approach, and to thank people when they provide feedback, to have that open dialogue and try to learn from it every time, because that builds that good rapport with the people that you're working with. And it then also helps you build your credibility. For me, it's also about coming in really prepared to conversations that you're going to have. For me, I like to have my facts in a row. That comes from the degree, that comes from beforehand when I did a lot of speech and debate when I was younger. I like to have my evidence, because that gives me a lot of the strength and confidence to then present my point very clearly and have something to point back to. And so that too meant that I was able to build credibility, because I was coming in with a credible case to begin with. I had done the legwork to be able to then come and present that point.
Yeah, very good. And talking about your team, you've touched on leadership style. So how challenging or not have you found trying to build a diverse team? And why has that been important for you?
So I think diversity is absolutely key, because we all come in with different backgrounds. And I don't just mean in terms of the characteristics that we can all see and the ones that are typically measured, but also the ones that we don't measure so much, like different education backgrounds. You know, we don't want everyone coming in with their master's in war studies. That would make for very singular decision making. You want people with various levels of education, different cultural backgrounds. And I think in financial crime in particular, it's so important because of the severity of the decisions that we have to make and the impact that those decisions can have. And also the fact that if we have bias, that bias not only has an impact within our organization, but also externally on a customer, and even further on law enforcement, who we inform with our reporting and our actions. So we can have a massive impact if we're getting it wrong, which is why it's so important to get that diversity right. I think within financial crime, through my own experience in my current role, as well as through the various firms that I worked with as a consultant, there is so much diversity within the sector. I think it's a really great space for it, actually. There are people from so many different backgrounds, whether that be in terms of their previous roles, because again, not many people know financial crime exists when they're starting off, so they come from all over. You know, some people say were previously in the military or law enforcement. You have other people with degrees, other people who joined school leavers programs straight out of secondary school. You have such a wide array. People from all different cultures coming in, people with all sorts of different diverse characteristics. The issue I see a lot more is when you start getting up to the leadership level in the top, where progressively you get whiter, older, and more male. And for me, the best way to overcome that is to champion, support, and mentor individuals from the beginning, to encourage them to have those opportunities to rise and progress through internal promotion, like I've been lucky enough to be able to do. So that they can further their careers and make that next jump and make it effectively.
And do you think that mentorship should be available within every company to try and encourage more females to become exco or leadership level?
Absolutely. I think it is something that really needs to be driven within a company and part fundamentally of a company's culture. But I also think there's a lot more to be done in terms of mentorship opportunities within the industry between different financial institutions or different teams within financial crime, for example. And there are some opportunities, but there's always room for more.
Yeah.
I definitely do a lot of mentorship myself in my organization, and I do firmly believe that if your organization doesn't have good mentorship opportunities, you can make your own by going out and finding a person who works for you, whether that's internally or externally. But the more that can be done to ingrain that as a practice, I think the better.
No, you make a really good point, Meredith. And I think it's one of those questions almost that how easily do you think that mentorship can be adopted into other financial institutions to encourage more women?
So I think it's always going to be easier said than done, of course. But the good news is that there is a lot of momentum within the industry at the moment. So, for example, several institutions are signed up to Women in Finance and are working to hit targets around female leadership. And I think as we see more and more female leaders within financial institutions, we're going to see a lot more of that push and a lot more people that women may want to turn to if they're maybe not comfortable necessarily seeking a male mentor, or they feel like they're not gaining quite as much from those male mentorship relationships as they would from speaking with another woman who maybe has gone through some of the same challenges that they have as part of their career. So I definitely think we're moving in the right direction, and hopefully over time it will be a lot easier to embed more of a mentorship culture within firms.
Yeah, good. And for you personally, did you have a female role model, somebody you aspired to, somebody you looked up to earlier in your career?
So one of the two founders of the consulting firm I worked at, Fintrail, Gemma Rogers, was definitely, I would say, a mentor, not officially, but unofficially. And I think that often can happen for women. There can be women that you look up to and who are role models, but they're not necessarily official mentors, especially in a small team like that. There's no need to be. You learn from that person every single day. But in terms of her style, approach, and knowledge base, all of that was so inspiring for me at the start of my career, and something I'm continuously grateful for, even now in my new role. Or not so new anymore, I suppose.
Well, you got your promotion at the start of the year, like you said, so congratulations.
Thank you.
You've mentioned Women in Finance, and obviously we have the Women in Financial Crime and Compliance Award, Women in Credit. What more do you think the industry potentially could do to be an advocate for women in these maybe previously male-dominated industry sectors?
It's a great question. And we've talked a lot around mentorship already. So I think, again, encouraging those cross-institution mentorship opportunities is really great. And there are some fantastic networks already that exist. For example, UK Finance has Women in Sanctions, which absolutely fantastic. But there's still a lot more that I think can be done in that space. Another thing that I think is probably worth mentioning as well, and connects a little bit to my journey and the lack of knowledge I had about the space, is doing more to encourage people generally, but also women in particular who are school leavers or graduates to join the industry, and just spreading that awareness of the field in general, because I don't see as much of that. And I think still, if you polled a group of recent university students or college or secondary school students, they would have no idea that this career path even exists. So I think there's a lot more that can be done there. And I think that financial crime compliance, it definitely is moving into an area that is relatively female-led. I mean, I think about within ClearBank, where I work, our Chief Risk and Compliance Officer is a woman. Our new Chief Risk Officer in Europe is a woman. My boss, the MLRO, is a woman. I'm a woman. So our head of financial crime operations is a woman. We have such a strong female leadership team. Honestly, it is. It is very inspiring, and I do see that in a lot of other firms. I don't think that ClearBank is alone there. And part of the reason for it is because so many women in my own life that I know want to have a job where they're passionate about what they're doing, where they feel like they're making a difference. And financial crime is one of the best places to do that. And so I think there's a real message there to sell to attract more talent to the industry.
Yeah. Well, probably on that note, what would your words of wisdom be to those in uni or those rising females who might be the next superstars of financial crime and compliance? What would you say to them?
What I would definitely say is to always be your true, authentic self wherever you're coming to work. And that comes to how you lead and how you perform as a worker, because we all come in with very different styles and you have to find what works right for you. You know, I'm not a believer of some of the think pieces out there that essentially tell you to just act more like a man and that'll get you success.
I completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all have different traits, and it's not like there's only 2, 3, 4 styles
different
of
values,
leadership.
isn't it?
Absolutely. Different values, different strengths, and different levels of comfort with certain activities and certain ways of communicating. So I think always be your true authentic self, both in terms of course, diverse characteristics, but also in terms of those more subtle differences in terms of how you approach leadership. And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah.
It is so easy, you know, and I can speak from my own experience, to be a perfectionist. And I know it's something that women in particular can really struggle with because they feel like they have to always prove themselves. And being willing to learn, being open to taking accountability for mistakes and knowing how to communicate them and resolve them effectively, that is so much more important than getting it right immediately on the first try. And then, of course, finding a field, whether you're in financial crime, which you should be because it's amazing, or another field where you're genuinely passionate about what you do. I think that's so important because it just opens the door. It builds your confidence being in a space you care about, which then encourages you to be more authentic to yourself and to be a better colleague or leader to those around you.
I think those are great parting words, Meredith. So thank you for sharing your story and being a part of our series.
Absolutely my pleasure. And hopefully it's something where there are several good takeaways for your listeners.
Thank you.